Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, August 23rd around here, the last day before we get college football back tomorrow, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with a little bit of a winners and losers from fall camp, a number of injuries that came out that might just land you on the loser side, and a number of teams that stayed healthy that might just put you on the winner side. That tends to be the moniker in fall camp early on. Then we'll get into an interesting story around Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin. Definitely a lot of stuff to take away from an excerpt out of a book that is being written by Army Katayan and John Talty over at CBS called The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. So very, very interesting piece that we will absolutely get into today. Then we have a little bit of a recruiting update, a couple of big-time commitments, including one of the best offensive tackles in the country committing to Oklahoma, and we have a ton of different intel coming up about a ton of commitments that are coming up over the next 7-10 days. So definitely want to get you updated there. We have lingering questions around the top 25 teams. We actually dip a little bit below the top 25 today, but that'll do it for this segment, at least through this week. And then at the very end, we'll do a little bit of a headline wrap up. A ton of stuff has happened throughout this week that I just want to get you guys on your guys' radar as we head into week 0. But before we get in, I apologize for that. Before we get in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen is to use that little $sign at the bottom of the chat there. You can leave a super chat, you can leave a super sticker, you can do any number of things to get more involved in the show, and all of it will show up on the screen. You'll be able to see your name, see your comment or question. Always really fun to have this be a little bit more interactive, and that's all that I want. I want this to be as much y'all show as it is mine, because that's obviously the best way to go about business. Definitely want this to be very, very interactive, so utilize that if you would like to. Also, we still have the GSMCpodcast.net page up if that's a little bit easier for you, but sometimes that super chat is just a little bit easier than going over to another website. So let's get into let's get into the first segment here, and let's break down the winners and losers from fall camp, because fall camp was all over the place. As you know, I had pretty much updates every single day for the past 2 or 3 weeks, because there was stuff coming out pretty much every single day for the last 2 or 3 weeks. But we're starting to wind down. There are a couple of teams that are starting to gear up for game week. There are a couple of teams over in Ireland about to play a game in about 26 hours, 27 hours from now. So definitely a lot of stuff to pull away from fall camp. But let's get into the winners first, and for me it starts with Utah. They might have had the best month of anyone in the country, and it's plainly just because Cam Rising got through it healthy. That is the number one thing for this team, bar anything else. A number of things could have gone wrong. Every other player on the team could have, that's not true. A lot of players could have gotten injured. As long as that guy was on the field, they were feeling pretty good about where they were. The other part of it is Dorian Singer is exactly who they thought he was going to be. He has come in and absolutely taken the reins as the wide receiver one, and it feels like he fits this system much more than he fit the USC one, where it felt like he could be a very special player, but just never really caught traction there. I do think he's an all Big 12 type player, though, so very, very high on him, and it seems like this fall camp went very, very smoothly. Not only Cam Rising being healthy, but pretty much everyone over in Salt Lake City is healthy right about now. So you got to feel pretty good if you're Utah. Obviously, health is something that you have to worry about week to week, but as of right now, Utah feels raring and ready to go. But Michigan's the other one I want to talk about, and it really just comes down to Alex Orji. It feels like he has taken full reins of this job, and it hasn't been named that he's the starter, but I'd be shocked if anything else happened at this point, because it sounds like throughout camp he has slowly taken more of a leadership role, has slowly taken more and more of the reins of what is going on in that offense, and that is just absolutely massive. It's something that, frankly, they absolutely need to happen if they're going to go to the playoff this year. They can't operate in a world where they have a quarterback going in and out of that starting role, whether it's Davis Warren or Jack Tuttle or Alex Orji. They can't play musical chairs and expect to get to the Big Ten title or even the playoffs. So definitely something to watch there. And then Jayshon Barham, Wesley Walker, 2 transfer pieces that came in, have been absolutely huge. Actually, I said Wesley Walker was at Tennessee yesterday. he is at Michigan. He transferred from Tennessee, so I got my wires crossed a little bit there. But losing Rod Moore is absolutely huge. Was absolutely huge for this team early on in spring camp, and getting somebody like Wesley Walker to fill that gap was absolutely massive. So it feels like all of the outside noise has kind of cooled off just a little bit. Now, there is a documentary coming out in about 4 days that we will break down to see just how much is going to happen. But as of right now, no suspension for Sherrone Moore, and it seems like it's going to stay that way. At least as of right now, a lot of stuff could change. But moving over to Auburn, this is a team that I think Tiger fans have to feel really good about, at least in terms of where you thought you were going to be. You know, Peyton Thorne seems like he looks very, very strong, a little bit closer to that 2021 form that they've been trying to get out of him for quite some time. Then you have guys like Cam Coleman, you have Keandre Lambert-Smith came in, Perry Thompson. The amount of talent on that wide receiver group is just out of this world. It is far and away the best Auburn wide receiver group that I have seen in quite some time. I'm not exactly sure what exact year I would pinpoint, but this group is really ridiculous, and I do think it's one of those things that they've done really well on the defensive line. It feels like the transfers are hitting. A lot of stuff is coming together for this team, and more than anything, it just feels like the energy around there is a little bit different. It feels like they kind of like Florida in the same sense, where they have a certain energy about them that no one else has about them. They believe in themselves the way that no one else does, and that tends to be a really, really good way to go about business as you head into a season that is going to get testy at times, no doubt about it. Moving over to Ohio State, it's all coming together for this team. You know, there were some worries as you walked into fall camp, whether it was Will Howard, can he take full control of this offense, the offensive line, can they find the right 5 guys? Both of those seem to be figured out. Tegra Shabula, the left guard, I believe, is going to be starting there, and he kind of made that a lot easier on the offensive line, so they feel pretty solid about that group, and Will Howard has taken control. You know, it's not the prettiest thing in the world passing the ball as of right now, but his ability to run the ball is the difference maker, and he's going to do plenty, at least through the first couple of weeks, to get them wins and then get a little bit more comfortable, and then he's off running. And then finally, Alabama. I think every worry you had going into fall camp, you at least feel a little bit better about. You know, it's not by far, it's definitely not fixed, but Xavier Brown came in, the freshman, and is making a number of different plays and seems to be ready to start at that corner position. Definitely will be a tall order in that Week 3 and Week 4 matchup against Wisconsin and Georgia, but at the end of the day, a very talented kid and seems to have answered every bell that you could possibly want. And then on top of that, Jalen Milroe is taking control of this offense, which is a scary reality. If this guy can find the groove that, I don't know if he's going to be nearly as prolific as Michael Penix is, but frankly, he doesn't have to be. So if he can find a groove in this offense and they can run this offense based on his strengths, it's going to be a scary proposition for pretty much everyone else in the country. And then some other teams that had some great fall camps is Miami, Florida State, Clemson. All of the big-time ACC teams seem to have really great months. Nebraska had a big-time injury to their left tackle, but other than that, everything seemed to be going very smoothly, and Dylan Raiola has taken more of those reins, so you got to feel good there. And then Colorado had a very nice fall camp with just a lot of things coming into place the way that they want to. So definitely a huge couple of weeks for these teams, and we'll see if it parlays into a couple of wins this upcoming season. But moving on to the losers, the first one's obvious. It is Texas. When you look at the amount of running backs in particular that they lost their RB1 CJ Baxter for the season, I believe, with a PCL and LCL injury, and then you had another injury to Christian Clark, a guy that was going to be more of a depth piece anyway, but at the end of the day, when you lose your top running back, you can't lose anyone else. So it's definitely a tough hit. They were able to bring in a player from Kansas, a graduate transfer. I'm blanking on his name right now. I apologize. Velton Gardner is the name, but he's come in and that helps that out just a little bit. But whenever you have those injuries, it's definitely going to be a little bit of an issue. But on the other side, you know, other than that, Texas has been kind of rolling. The interior defensive line has been playing really well. The secondary has been coming together the way that they want it to. And obviously, you know, it's going to jump off the page when you lose your top running back and then you lose another one a couple of days later. But at the end of the day, they're a mostly healthy team. If they can figure out that running back position, then everyone else seems to be more than fine. moving over to Texas A&M, same exact problem. You lost Ruben Bain and likely was going to be your top guy at running back. Now, they are well equipped to handle that. You know, Le'Veon Moss is a really good player. I think Amari Daniels is someone that's going to take a step forward. So it's not necessarily like they're going to bottom out, kind of the same way as Texas. I'm not necessarily worried about them totally losing all the rushing effort for this year, but it definitely is something that they're going to have to worry about as they head into it. And also, the other part is, sounds like this O-line is coming along, but not necessarily where they want it to be. It sounds like they, have gotten better from a year ago, but they were pretty far off a year ago. So they definitely are going to have to continue to improve and find the 5 right guys to fit in those positions. But overall, it seemed to be, outside of the Ruben Owens injury, outside of a couple of little things for A&M, it was relatively smooth through fall camp. Notre Dame had it really tough. Losing Charles Jagusa really put them in a tough spot. Those tackle positions now are pretty much musical chairs, and they're just trying to figure out who the best 2 that fit there, and it might just be 2 freshmen or a freshman and a sophomore. So it's going to be something to really watch, especially going into that week 1 matchup against A&M. You're going to have some really good edge rushers coming at you in Nick Scourton and Cassius Howell, and if those guys aren't ready, they're going to have a problem. It sounds like the wide receiver core is looking strong, though, and Riley Leonard is coming along. So it's not necessarily like the sky is falling, but if you were to pick a position that you least want to get injured outside of quarterback, it's probably left tackle, so definitely a tough hit for that Notre Dame team. Over to Oklahoma, this one is a little bit different than the rest of them. They did lose Jaden Gibson, a star wide receiver that I think is just a game changer for this offense in a number of different ways, especially with someone like Jackson Arnold at quarterback. But also, it sounds like this O-line is okay. It's not necessarily where they want it to be, but it sounds like they feel pretty good about the tackles, don't feel quite as good about the interior of that line, and it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of develops throughout the season. Jackson Arnold still had some troubles with turnovers, which is expected against a Brent Venables defense, but it'll definitely be something to watch. But as of right now, it doesn't necessarily look quite as clean as Oklahoma would want, and they don't necessarily have the longest runway in the world as they get into SEC play. And then Missouri, this one's a little bit different as well, just because it's one injury that's really kind of tearing me down here. Darius Williams is a very, very talented guy they brought in from Georgia, and losing him for the year was a huge blow. I think this defense is one that it has plenty of talented players, but not necessarily enough to sustain some of these injuries, and I think they're going to have to be able to find someone, and it's likely going to be a younger guy to step into that position. So overall, I don't think it necessarily was a disastrous fall camp by any means, but when you lose a player that was likely going to be a starter on a defense that is likely going to take a step back, you never love to hear that. So I do think Missouri had a little bit tough of a month, but overall, if that's the only big-time thing that happened, can't be too mad if you're a Tiger fan. But the other ones that had a tough go of it, Rutgers lost Mohamed Tori, a remarkably talented linebacker for them and likely their best player, period, on that team, other than Kyle Mondegai. But at the end of the day, definitely a tough blow for them. And then Tennessee losing Jordan Thomas was absolutely huge and something that could really hurt their season because that back end looks less than good as of right now, but definitely a lot of things coming out of fall camp. Winners and losers is always kind of a tough thing to pin down because you usually hear pretty good stuff coming out of these fall camps, no doubt about it, but at the end of the day, there are some things you can kind of read between the lines and find some winners and losers in there. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin. If you didn't see, there was a little bit of an interesting article, or not article, but an excerpt from a book that is being put out that is very interesting when you talk about the Nick Saban-Lane Kiffin relationship. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down the winners and the losers from fall camp. Obviously, there were some teams that took some pretty bad injuries, definitely found themselves on the loser side of things, but for the most part, fall camp is a kind of a hard thing to judge, so winners and losers is a little bit in between for the most part. But let's get into the new details around Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin, because there was a very, very interesting excerpt that was taken out of a book that is coming up that I'm definitely going to read from John Talty and Armin Kittian, and it's called The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. So essentially just breaking down how crazy the sport is right now and breaking down all of the behind-the-scenes stuff that these coaches have to deal with. And the newest excerpt that came out of this was around Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin. And it was about how Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin famously did not get along very well when they were at Alabama together. And there were some details that came out from this that were very, very interesting. And one of the biggest ones, obviously, was just the details around their relationship were not great, plain and simple. There were a lot of testy moments. There were a lot of different things that kind of got in their way when it came down to them really working together the way they wanted to. But at the end of the day, when it came down to it, this was a hire that Nick Saban needed to make, and it's something that I'll talk about here in a second. But the main crux of this story, the quote that everyone's running with, the quote that everyone's looking at, is rather expletive, so I will not necessarily say it on the show, but let's just say Nick Saban had called Jimmy Sexton late on in the process after Lane Kiffin had left the program and yelled at him, essentially, and yelled at him because he was mad that Jimmy Sexton had talked him into hiring Lane Kiffin to be his offensive coordinator after all the stuff at USC, after everything went down, and Nick Saban was none too happy about it after everything went down at the end of it, because Lane Kiffin, as we all know, or maybe you don't know, but he was fired before the national title in 2017. That never happens. And it happened because of a very, very interesting kind of story that was actually told on Josh Pate's show last night when he was talking about after the SEC title game. That was kind of the moniker of when Lane Kiffin was allowed to go out and seek other jobs, because he was a really good offensive coordinator. There were a number of teams trying to get him to be their head coach. Not necessarily crazy business, very much standard operating procedure there. But Nick Saban said, as long as it's after the SEC title, you're more than fine. Sounds like it was right after the SEC title. It sounds like Jimmy Sexton was waiting for Lane Kiffin with a phone, and he was on the phone with, presumably, the FAU AD and getting a job offer. So definitely a very, very interesting situation right after they won an SEC title and were heading to another national title for all of that to be going down. But that's the reality of college sports. Everyone understands that the hiring of coaches is very weird. You don't know the half of it. I can promise you that. And frankly, I don't even know the half of it. But the other funny part of this, kind of to me at least, funny part of this was apparently during this blow-up that happened between Nick Saban and Jimmy Sexton, Lane Kiffin had called Sexton beforehand and said, Saban's about to call you because he's not too happy with me, because apparently he had told Saban he doesn't know what he's talking about, and that is the last thing you want to say to Nick Saban. But at the end of the day, it is one of those things that you didn't need to be a rocket scientist, you didn't need to be a psychologist, you didn't need to be, a body language expert to understand these two guys were very different people, and they got along because they won football games. And that's kind of what I want to get to right here is, this is why Nick Saban is who he is. Plain and simple. This is why Nick Saban is as special, as incredible in this sport as he is, because, I apologize for that. Did not mean to do that one bit. But he is outright special for 10 different reasons. And the biggest reason is he's willing to put his ego aside. He's willing to work with people that maybe aren't his best friends outside the office, but if they're winning football games, that's the ultimate goal. And if you remember back in 2013, 2014, it was not an easy transition for Nick Saban to go from pounding the rock, what they called murder ball over at Alabama, to what they needed to do, which was spread the ball out, which was get a little bit more multiple on offense and push the ball down the field. That was not something that he was willing to do for a long time. And Lane Kiffin was the one that kind of ushered in that new era. And then Sark took over, and then a number of things happened that made that one of the scariest offenses in the country. But overall, it was one of those hires that a lot of people wouldn't have made. And a lot of people wouldn't have made it not because it wouldn't have been the best thing for their program, but because they didn't want to, because they didn't want to work with that guy, because they didn't want to have to deal with it. And Nick Saban kind of knew that, but he also knew this guy can let us win football games. This guy can keep us where we are, which is at the very top of college football. And that was exactly what happened. So all of the craziness, all of the behind-the-scenes stuff, we can talk about it every which way from Tuesday. But at the end of the day, Nick Saban is who he is because he's willing to put that aside. He's willing to say, this might not be the prettiest situation behind the scenes, but as long as we're putting points on the board and more points than the guys on the other side, I have no problem. So that's part of why Nick Saban is so special. Everyone talks about the X's and O's and his defensive acumen, and he has an incredible amount of that. Don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, the thing that made him so special was his ability to make coaching hires that made sense and make coaching hires that maybe weren't going to fit too well off the field, but on the field it was going to make you a winner. So that's one of the biggest takeaways I had, was just Nick Saban is willing to do just about anything to keep that dynasty alive, and it's one of the reasons he's so special. Having that ability to put your ego aside and say, yeah, I'll hire this guy that I tend to believe is not going to work too well here because I think he's going to help us win football games. So that was one of my bigger takeaways. The other takeaway is plain and obvious, and it's staring us in the face, and a lot of people, for whatever reason, have not been really talking about it too much, and it's Jimmy Sexton. He is the most powerful man in this sport, and it might be by a country mile. This guy can define everything in the world of college football for quite some time, particularly in the SEC, because go ahead and look at his client list. It is a lot of the premier coaches in this sport, whether it's Kalen DeBoer or Steve Sarkisian or Dan Lanning or Kirby Smart or Mike Norvell. They're all Jimmy Sexton guys, along with Lane Kiffin. So it's one of those things that we talk about all of the TV executives. We talk about all the ADs and the presidents and all the people that affect this sport. The most powerful guy you might not even know. It's Jimmy Sexton standing in the hallway of some game, holding a phone call from an AD to give to Lane Kiffin after the 2016 SEC title. So he's that guy. He's the guy that brokers a lot of these deals. And it's the reality of a lot of coaching hires around, where there are some things that happen that maybe don't have too much to do with football, but it makes it happen. It makes the hire get through, and it's a very, very, very interesting thing. And a lot of people took it away as Nick Saban can be pushed around. Nick Saban can, be malleable to whatever he needs. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think he just understands that Jimmy Sexton is who he is because he knows a lot about football and he knows a lot about these guys. And I think he understands that although Lane Kiffin can be a little bit frustrating at times, he absolutely is someone that can elevate our team. And I think that's the thing that really makes Nick Saban as special as he is. All of the game plans, all of the intensity at practice, all of the technical stuff he's incredible at. There's no doubt about that. He's also miles better at making sure that everyone around him is as good, as incredible as they possibly can be. And that comes down to offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, personnel groups, recruiting staff, whatever it is. Everyone's held to a really high standard, and Lane Kiffin was as well. He just didn't necessarily meet it all that often. But at the end of the day, this was two very, very different guys. These are two very different approaches to coaching football. One's not necessarily better than the other. Now, a lot of people would tell you Nick Saban way is the right way, and I understand that, no doubt about it. But Lane Kiffin can absolutely be successful with the way that he's going about business, and it looks like he might just well be this upcoming year. But at the end of the day, none of this is super surprising. We all saw the interactions on the sideline like that one. We all saw all of the stuff that kind of went back and forth between these two, and it's definitely going to be one of those things that no one's necessarily surprised that they weren't the biggest fans of each other. I think the big surprise was how much power Jimmy Sexton has, and the fact that Nick Saban was even willing to make the hire in the first place. So it's a number of things that you can pull away from this. But overall, I mean, you look at these guys, they're well past all of this stuff. They, in at least outwardly, they've been very, very cordial to each other, and they will cross paths again. Nick Saban will be covering a game in Oxford at some point, and I really do hope he picks against the Rebels. Plain and simple, I really want him to keep that going. But at the end of the day, I don't think these guys hate each other. I don't think they're, out to get each other by any means, but it's definitely one of those stories that you knew that they didn't love each other. You didn't necessarily know the depth of it, and it's definitely a very interesting thing, and it shows you just how powerful Jimmy Sexton is in the world of college football, and it's a name that you might not hear too much on headlines, but you hear plenty behind the scenes, and he is a just massive power broker in this sport. So it's a very, very interesting piece. It's definitely a book that I absolutely will crack open once it does come out, but at the end of the day, it's one of those things that not overly surprising. None of this really caught me by surprise or really shocked me at the end of the day, because everyone knew that this was a relationship that at best was testy, at best was a little bit weird, at best was off kilter. But at the end of the day, Saban got to leave with the last laugh. He's 0-5 against Kiffin as head coaches, and now he gets to be on College game day and probably pick against him during those games. But at the end of the day, I don't think these guys hate each other. I don't think they have vitriol for each other, but I do think during those games, they had just a little bit. There was a little bit extra energy in those, and you see where it came from. So a crazy story, one of those that, you never really know the details of all of this stuff, and frankly, there's many more details behind the scenes that I don't even know that hopefully at some point I'll be, able to see behind the scenes of this sport. But at the end of the day, it's off the charts crazy how Nick Saban was able to handle all of this, hire this guy that he knew wasn't going to be the greatest fit, and still go on to win national titles. And then when he walked out the door right before a national title, it didn't necessarily stop their beat. Now, they did lose that game, but at the end of the day, they kept moving on, and it was just incredible to watch, and it's one of those big-time testaments of what Nick Saban is, and an even bigger testament of who Jimmy Sexton is in the sport. But we'll take our second break here, and when we come back, we got a recruiting update for you guys. A couple of commitments, not too many commitments to update you on, but plenty of commitments coming up over the next little bit, and definitely some ones that I need to get on y'all's radar. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a very interesting story that came out around Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin and Jimmy Sexton. That was very interesting. Definitely some interesting quotes in there, and breaks down just how questionable that relationship between Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin was for quite some time. But getting into a little bit of a recruiting update here, there were a number of big-time commitments over the last little bit, but also a ton of intel that I need to get you guys updated on. And we'll start with one of the biggest commitments that happened over the past week with Akeelan Deer. He committed to Alabama. This one was pretty much set in stone the second that he decommitted from Ole Miss, if I had to imagine. It felt like Alabama was leading from that day and officially has gotten his commitment. A huge running back, 6 foot, 210, one of those guys that looks like an SEC running back right now, and will be added to a group over there at Alabama that is just outright ridiculous at the running back position. So a huge pickup for them, and definitely someone that is going to play pretty early on in his career at Alabama, if I had to imagine. A 4-star wide receiver, Andrew Marsh, has committed to Michigan. This is a huge pickup. I talked about this a number of times, but a number of teams were in on him. Washington, Texas, USC, Colorado, all teams that hypothetically are more explosive on the offensive side of the ball for those wide receivers than Michigan is. And I think pulling this guy in is massive. And it really, when you look at Michigan recruiting right now comparative to 2 years ago, 3 years ago with Jim Harbaugh, it's totally different. Sherrone Moore knows that he has to elevate that part of his program if they're going to continue this sustained success, and this is a really good player to bring in. This is a guy that can absolutely fly, and if you can have more and more players on that Michigan roster that is just about getting the ball in their hands and letting them go, I think this offense could get way more dynamic in a couple of years. So absolutely huge pickup there, and definitely a guy that I expect, frankly, to start his first year at Michigan. Moving on, the biggest commitment of this past little bit was Michael Fasusi, a remarkably talented 5-star offensive tackle from Louisville, Texas. He is committed to Oklahoma. Bill Bedenbaugh did incredible work in this recruitment. Frankly, this one might be one of the biggest commits of this entire cycle. When you look at what OU needs on that offensive line, and you look at how good Michael Fasusi is, he is likely going to be a starter on this offensive line next year. And it's going to be a little bit out of necessity, but frankly, I don't think they're going to worry about it too much. I think this guy is going to be just downright incredible and be one of those guys, kind of like a Kelvin Banks or a Will Campbell, that walks in, starts right away, maybe has a couple of bumps in the road his freshman year, but then develops into a straight-up first-round talent, no doubt about it. So very much like this kid, and beating out A&M and Texas had to feel a little bit good as well, a little cherry on top of this one. But moving on to some scheduled commitments that are coming up this weekend and, over the next couple of days, is Onis Kunabani, is committing today around 12:45, 12:30. Definitely one to watch. Very talented corner, 6'1", 180. Perfect cornerback size, frankly, as of right now. And it sounds like Tennessee might just get this one. It's down to them and Florida State, but as of right now, Tennessee is getting all of the crystal balls, and frankly, I would be surprised if he wasn't a Vol at the end of today, and Tennessee just keeps rolling on. It's absolutely ridiculous what they've been able to do over the last little bit, and it sounds like they're going to add to it today. Moving over to Nick Brooks, he is also committing today at 4 p.m. This is one to watch. This is a huge, huge commitment for one team in particular, and that's Texas. Texas obviously just lost out on Michael Fasusi. This is a way to kind of soften that sting, kind of make that look a little bit better, and it sounds like they're leading as of right now. They've gotten a couple of predictions for him to commit to Texas later today, but USC is still pushing through that through the wire, through that whistle, so we'll see what happens here, but as of right now, I would lean Texas, and pretty heavily lean Texas. Over to Nate Shepard, a very talented 3-star running back that is going to commit a little bit later tonight. He's down to a number of teams, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to come down to Duke. Northwestern, Cincy, Cal, and Tulane are in it. He is a Louisiana kid, so Tulane getting a little bit of a look there. But as of right now, it looks like Duke is going to get this one, and that would be a great pickup for the start of the Manny Diaz era and kind of getting this thing off the ground on the recruiting world. Moving over to Jonah Williams, this is the guy that probably is the main event of the weekend. He is committing on Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it's a 3-team battle. LSU, A&M, and Texas are still in this thing. It sounds like LSU and Texas are starting to pull away from A&M just a little bit, but Steve Wiltfong has put in a prediction for Williams to commit to Texas, and that would be absolutely huge for Texas because that back-end recruiting has not necessarily been great as of lately. So definitely something that they could very much use, and he was at A&M. One of the biggest differences in this recruitment has been the baseball coach over at Texas, Jim Schlossnagle, and he was actually at A&M a year ago. So maybe that was the difference. Maybe if he was still at A&M, that's where Jonah Williams is. So it shows you that, even if you have a football commit, you can all work together and find a way to get that guy on campus. So a huge thing for Texas, and it sounds like they got a little bit of an assist from the baseball team. Javon McFadden is another guy to watch, 4-star interior offensive lineman. He is going to commit on tomorrow at some point. Doesn't sound like there's a specific time set, but he's between Colorado, Maryland, Ohio State, and South Carolina. It sounds like it's going to be Ohio State. It sounds like more and more is pushing towards that, but I do kind of want to touch on, the fact that the top 4 is Colorado, Maryland, Ohio State, and South Carolina. this gives you an idea of what recruiting is today. There's going to be more of these kids that have these kind of weird top four, and maybe the Ohio States and the Alabamas and the Texas and the Georgias win out at the end of the day, but it does show you that NIL and some of this other stuff is slowly, very slowly, kind of evening the scales, and it's definitely a really interesting thing to watch. I feel like I've seen much more weird top fours this year than I ever have before. Jonte Gilbert was another one that was, I believe, Georgia, NC State, USF, and Georgia Tech. So very, very interesting groups that is going to make recruiting just a little bit more fun as we move forward, not this cycle, but moving forward into 2026 and 2027. Aiden Anding is another guy to watch. He is committing tomorrow, and definitely going to be a very interesting commitment because right now it looks like it's LSU. It looks like it is all LSU, and they've been able to lock down the in-state kid from Ruston, Louisiana. But Texas is going to push as hard as they possibly can. Period. End of story. They are going to do everything they can to get this guy on the roster because it might be Terry Joseph's job if he doesn't. That is the cornerback coach over at Texas, and right now they have one cornerback commit, and he is the 103rd cornerback in the country. Now, I think Caleb Chester is a good player. I'm not necessarily talking down about Caleb Chester, but if you're Texas, you need more than that. Maybe it's through the portal at the end of the day, but I can almost promise you, if they don't, flip a guy like Dorian Brew or like Devin Sanchez or I'm blanking on his name right now, but there is a cornerback committed to TCU that is a very good player. But at the end of the day, if they don't flip one of those guys, Terry Joseph might be finding another job this time next year. So something to watch there, but I feel like it's going to be LSU. If it's not Texas, then you might just start wanting to watch Terry Joseph just a little bit closer over there in Austin. LSU also looks to add Walter Mathis, the 3-star defensive lineman. Very, very talented guy. And frankly, the biggest thing about this guy is his motor apparently is ridiculous. And that's what LSU needs. They don't necessarily need all of these 4-star defensive linemen because that's going to take time. You got to show that your defensive lineman coach, Bo Davis, is developing these guys, putting these guys in the best scenarios to get those top flight guys. In the meantime, getting guys that have really high motors and are going to work every single day will definitely do the job. I can promise you that. So a huge pickup there, and definitely someone that I really like in this recruiting class. Moving on to Nashawn Montgomery, 4-star wide receiver. This one looks like it's going to be the Florida Gators. LSU's still in it. Florida State, Bama, Oregon, Penn State, they're all still in it. But I think it's going to be Florida. They're kind of running away with this one, and it's just astounding to me every single time that Florida gets a big-time commit because it shows me more and more that that program is working very differently on the inside than what we think it is on the outside. So definitely going to be something to watch, and it sounds like Florida just continues to build up a class that, frankly, with a coach that might be out the door at the end of the year, they should not be able to put together. But moving on to Andrew Babalola, it sounds like he is getting closer and closer to that decision, and it sounds like it's getting more and more of a Michigan versus Stanford battle. Stanford had a number of crystal balls early on in this process, and then Michigan kind of came out of nowhere and stole the show a little bit. Oklahoma still feels like they are kind of in this fight, but locking up Michael Fasusi obviously kind of takes away from this one a little bit. Missouri's another team to watch, but as of right now, I'm going to lean into Michigan. I do think Michigan is likely going to win this one out. I think Stanford's going to be a very close second, but I do think Michigan wins this one and gets a big-time offensive lineman, the same way they've been getting big offensive linemen the last 10 years. So a huge pickup there. And then just some quick hitting updates here. Michael Terry, the second, is someone, number one athlete in the country, very talented kid. He's starting to make his visits around. He's going to be in Nebraska for that Colorado game in week 2. He's going to make a visit to Texas and Oregon before it's all said and done. So this is one that we felt like might come off the board this month. Very unlikely that that happens. Probably is a little bit more dragged out than that, but still seems like a Texas lean as of right now. But as we know, these recruitments that take a little bit longer, a lot of stuff can happen. So we'll see what happens there. I think Oregon is still very much in this one, and Nebraska still hangs around quite a bit in this one. So definitely will be something to watch. As of right now, I'd lean Texas, but it could change in a day. The biggest story in recruiting right now is Deuce Knight. The Notre Dame commit 5-star quarterback is going to be in Auburn, Alabama for the Alabama A&M game in week 1. This feels like the moment. I think all of us have kind of been waiting for that moment where he finally flips, he finally makes that big-time decision, and I think it might just come on that weekend. I don't necessarily say surprised, but I tend to think he's going to have a commitment in, or at least public, by the end or during that visit. I would just have to be honest there. I do think that's likely what's going to happen. But at the end of the day, maybe Notre Dame can fend that off and keep that guy in the class, because they very much need him. Moving on, Phillip Bell, a very, very talented wide receiver out of Mission Viejo, California. Excuse me, kind of in between my words there. But he will announce his decision on the 31st of August. It all looks like Ohio State right now. I'd be very surprised if it went any other direction. A lot of time till that date, but it's going to be Ohio State if I had to imagine. Penn State is leading the way for Malachi Goodman. USC still trying to do work here the same way they're trying to do work for Nick Brooks, but at the end of the day, it looks like Penn State is going to be the team. Auburn's another team to watch here, but I'd lean towards Penn State in this one, and could not imagine that there would be a better place for an offensive tackle to go right about now. And then moving on, we have one more very, very interesting thing. Oregon sounds like they're trying to flip a big-time tight end. Vander Plug, a very talented 6'6", 210-pound guy that is a Washington commit right now. So it would be a little bit of a steal for Oregon to pull him away, but definitely is going to be one that is going to be really interesting to watch. And I think Oregon might just be successful in this one, because they've been successful in just about everything in the world of recruiting lately. But definitely a lot of stuff going on in recruiting. A couple of other commitments that are coming up soon, Jamie French and a number of other guys that we will absolutely update you on here and there throughout the season. But we're about to get into football, so it's going to be a little bit harder to get around to recruiting, but we absolutely will keep you updated as you need it. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to do some lingering questions around the top 25 teams. We have the last 3 top 25 teams, and then I just picked the next 3 teams that got the most amount of votes to give some questions about. So we got 6 teams for you right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just gave a little bit of a recruiting update, a ton of big-time commitments, and a ton coming this weekend that we will update you on where all those end up at the end of the, at probably towards the beginning of next week. But let's get into some lingering questions around the top 25 teams, and we'll dip just a little bit below the top 25 today. But let's get into this, and let's start over in Southern California with USC. And my biggest question is, how big of a difference maker is D'Anton Lynn? How big of a difference can he make in year one with the current personnel that USC has and with the current structure that they have in that program? Because that was what he was brought there to do, right? He wasn't brought there just to fix the defensive scheme. He was brought there to fix the mentality, to fix the energy, to fix the strength and conditioning in some ways, and to fix just the amount of players that they have on that roster in the personnel. So I think they have players that can make plays. I don't necessarily think they have enough by any means to be where they want to be going forward and be a constant contender in the playoff going forward, but they have some guys that can make some plays, no doubt about it. When you talk about Barry Alexander, he's a very athletically inclined guy. He is going to make a number of different plays this upcoming year, but really does have to be a beast if they want to be the defense that they are capable of being. Kamari Ramsey's another guy that followed Lynn over from UCLA, very talented. Easton Arnold Mascaneras is another guy to watch there in the linebacker position. So they have guys. It's not like USC is out there with a bunch of guys that should be playing at Tulane. But at the end of the day, it is an uphill battle. There are so many things that have to be changed, not only about that defense when scheme and personnel, but behind the scenes with the energy they come to practice with the intensity that they play with. And it feels like a lot of that stuff has been put into place. It feels like fall camp has been a little bit more intense than it has been in years past over there at USC. But at the end of the day, they need a really solid season, and it doesn't have to be leaps and bounds for this defense. I've talked about this before. They just have to be opportunistic. You're going to have an offense on the other side that's going to score points. I promise you that. So just put the ball back in their hands. Get a couple of turnovers here and there and make sure that you're in these games late so your offense can make plays down the stretch. So I think it's one of those that It's not where they want it to be right now by any means, but say he improves them from, I believe they were 116 a year ago in total defense, up to 85. If he does that, there's a chance they win 8-9 games, and then they're off running and recruiting. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer battle, but as of right now, I think D'Anton Lynn's going to make enough of a difference to make sure that a big difference can be made down the road. Moving on to North Carolina State, and the biggest thing I have here is, can you get Grayson McCall back to 2021 Grayson McCall? Because if you remember that year for him, it was downright special. He was over at Coastal Carolina, and it was him and Isaiah Likely just tearing up defenses up every which way from Tuesday. It was insane to watch this guy go to work. And now he's in a situation that is roughly as good, if not way better, than what he had in 2021 at Coastal Carolina. When you have guys like Kevin Concepcion, Noah Rogers, Justin Jolie, all beasts on the outside. And then Jordan Waters is probably the best running back that he's had to deal with, but also NC State's had in quite some time. So a huge pickup for a number of these different transfer guys that they brought in. Kevin Concepcion was obviously already there, but you look at all the guys on the outside that he's going to be able to throw to. There's a world where he gets back to that 2021 Grayson McCall, where he gets back to that guy, and we can see all the special things that made him one of the stories of college football that year. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one. I think that Tennessee game in week 2 is going to be incredible to watch, and Robert and I, the offensive coordinator, to see how all of this unfolds. He's had to put a lot of stuff together. It's a lot of talent, so it's a good problem to have, but definitely a lot of things that they got to put together, and most importantly, just got to get Grayson McCall playing that 2021 football again. If that happens, this is absolutely an ACC contender. Moving on to Iowa, my question is, do they have a quarterback? Plain and simple. Do they have a guy that is going to be able to win them games this year? Because they did just name Cade McNamara the starter for the opener against Illinois State. I think he's going to play well there, and if he doesn't, my lord, I don't know what's happening over there at quarterback position, but at the end of the day, I do think he's going to play fine. Can he sustain that through entire season is something that I don't feel very confident in. And the other guy they have on that roster is Brendan Sullivan. I've talked about him a little bit. I think he's the guy that's likely going to end up taking this job at some point this season. I don't know when that comes, but I do think he's the guy that just gives them a little bit better of a chance to win. Now, I feel pretty confident in saying this is not going to be a good offense. I feel fairly confident in saying this is going to be a bad offense, but if they take a small step forward, I mean minuscule, I mean 1% step forward, literally just tiptoe forward, you're going to be able to win a couple more games. And this is a very good defense, one of the best defenses that Kirk Ferentz has had in quite some time over at Iowa, and they're going to be able to do plenty of stuff on that side of the ball. They just need a quarterback that can execute. So right now, I don't necessarily know if they have one. Maybe it's that argument that if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. Well, I don't even know if they have one. So at the end of the day, this is a huge worry for them, and it doesn't seem like it's remotely solved throughout fall camp, and definitely something to watch as they head into the season. Moving on to the teams that are outside the top 25 but are right there. Louisville is a team to watch this upcoming year, and really, can Tyler Shuck stay on the field is really the only thing for this team. They're very, very talented at a number of different positions. Obviously, Colin Lacey going down with an injury. I believe he's out 6 to 8 weeks. Definitely going to be a tough thing for this team, but this is a very talented squad, and Tyler Shuck is at the very center of it, and the problem is he's had a really tough time staying on the field. Last year, he played 4 games for Texas Tech. I don't think in his career he's ever played more than 7 games in a year. Now, in that year, he went 5-2, so he does win games when he's out there on the field. He does play some really good games. He got wins over Oklahoma and Ole Miss that year, so it's not like he's a bad quarterback. It's not like he's capable of executing this offense, but he's got to stay on the field. And frankly, he's probably got to elevate his game just a little bit, because in some of those games that he lost last year especially, it was very up and down. It was very shaky from time to time, and it was very kind of variable when you walked onto that field. So as long as he's on the field, you feel pretty good, but also he likely does need to up his ability just a little bit, especially with some of the running back troubles that they're having over there at Louisville right now. So definitely something to watch. And then that's another picture of Tyler Shuck. Virginia Tech is the other team I want to talk about, and the biggest thing here is is comfort the thing that takes Kyron Drones and Virginia Tech over the hump? Is that the thing that defines the ACC this upcoming year? And it's something I've talked about kind of on a grandiose scale before, where the ACC has Cam Rising coming in, DJ coming in, Grayson McCall coming in, a number of other transfer quarterbacks walking into this conference for the very first time, and then SMU coming in for the very first time to this conference. Is being in your offense for 1 year, is being in your conference for 1 year the most important thing for quarterbacks in the ACC this upcoming year? Because Kyron Drones is as comfortable as can be. He might be as comfortable as anyone in their offense in the conference, other than maybe Haynes King, because that dude looks like he's just exactly where he needs to be at all times. But regardless, Kyron Drones is one of those guys that can totally take over the ACC race. He can be the story of college football. He can be the guy that absolutely tears people apart. And right now, he has comfort with his wide receivers. He can go through every read or check that you need him to. He has everything in this playbook essentially in the back of his head, and he doesn't have to think about it too much. That is huge going into the season, and it's a very manageable schedule. So overall, I think Kyron Drones could be the story of the entire college football season. I think they could win the ACC. I think they could go into the college football playoff, and if they do, I tend to believe it's going to be because of that comfortability that he has in this offense. So definitely something to watch, and one of those that I think Kyron Drones is just an outright ridiculous athlete, and if I'm betting on any specific player more than Kyron Drones, I have not found him yet. So very much like this player, and I think it might just be that the comfortability in this offense makes the total difference for this guy. Moving on to Boise State, the biggest question is very, very clear. What do they need to do to secure that spot in the CFP? They are the going favorite for that spot in the CFP and definitely should be going into this season. A very talented team, particularly on defense, has a very, very good group over there. And I do think when you have Ashton Jainty, one of the best players and running backs in the country, a lot of things can go wrong and you can still play really good football. But Boise State, as far as I can tell, if you go 12-1, you're in. I no matter what, honestly. I think I've said this on here before. An undefeated Liberty wouldn't get in, almost bar none, if you were to ask me. I understand there's a reality where maybe there's a ton of 2-loss group of 5 teams and you put them in there, but at the end of the day, if there's a 12-1 team and then there's 13-0 Liberty, give me the 12-1 team 10 times out of 10. But Boise State, if they go 12-1, they've lost to Oregon. Obviously, that's not necessarily a bad loss by any means, but then they've run the table from there. And I think that would be very, very clear they would be in the title. Now the question becomes, who are the teams that could possibly get in their way? Because there's a couple other teams that could go 12-1 during the stretch. You want to talk about Memphis or Tulane or App State, a couple other teams that absolutely could go 12-1, and then you're having a conversation because Memphis could have their only loss to Florida State, and then Tulane could have their only loss to Oklahoma, but have a win over Kansas State because they have both those guys on their schedule. So if either of those teams go 12-1, this would be the really interesting conversation. If Boise State went 12-1 and no one else did, and then Liberty went 13-0, I don't even think that's a conversation, if I'm being totally honest. But at the end of the day, I do think it's going to be really interesting to watch this. I would say if you get to 12-1, you are likely in almost bar none, but maybe a Memphis or a Tulane makes this thing a little bit more interesting. Now, if you go undefeated, you might just be one of the auto bids, frankly, because if you beat Oregon at their home, then there's no question that I would put you in that position. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. The group of 5 is just impossible to get a beat on, so I tried my best, but I definitely think a 12-1 season would very likely put Boise State in that CFP field. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a headline wrap-up, just kind of do quick rapid fire among a number of really interesting stories that came out throughout this week. So stick around and we'll be right back with that. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the big time lingering questions around the top 25 teams in the country. We dipped just a little bit below the top 25 today, but let's get into a little bit of a headline catch up. There is a number of things that have come out throughout this week that I want to get you guys updated on as we head into week 0. And it starts with Kirk Ferentz. He had a suspension for week 1 that kind of came out of nowhere, honestly. Was a little bit surprised when this came across my Twitter feed, but he is going to be suspended for the first game against Illinois State for breaking rules about contacting a player before he entered in the transfer portal. That player is Cade McNamara. It sounds like Cade McNamara was the person that all of this kind of stemmed from, and that started asking some people some questions about, who turned them in, because that tends to be how this unfolds, is someone knows something went wrong at one of these other schools, and they go tell someone that matters, and that's how all of this kind of goes down. It sounds like it wasn't Michigan, which opens a lot of very, very interesting doors that I won't necessarily get into right now, but obviously a very, very interesting story and one that is going to hurt them. Now, Cade McNamara will be out there because he is the starter for that game, but also wide receivers coach John Budmeyer is going to be out for this game, so definitely something to watch there. Assistant head coach Seth Wallace will take over for this game as acting head coach, but it is Illinois State. They should be more than fine, and if they're not, then I don't even know what Iowa football is going to be this year, but at the end of the day, definitely a very interesting story and one that will shake up week 1 just a little bit. Moving on to maybe the biggest news of the entire weekend, or entire week, Courtney Morgan, the GM over at Alabama, got a huge raise. He's going to make an average of $825,000 annually over the next 3 years, a landmark deal, the highest paid personnel guy in the country by a margin. I can promise you that. And it's going to start a landslide. I can promise you that. When you talk about guys like Brandon Harris over at Texas, Aaron Joe at Georgia Tech, a number of other GMs and player personnel people all across the country, they're jumping for joy right now. And it sounds like Courtney Morgan actually turned down about $1 million a year from USC to stick with Kalen DeBoer and go to Alabama. So very, very interesting. Now, $825,000 goes a little bit further in Alabama than $1 million does in California, so that might have played a part in this. But at the end of the day, a huge contract for him. One of those guys that you might not know his name, but he is integral to what Kalen DeBoer has done over the last little bit and what Alabama is going to do over the next couple of years. So a great hire for him, great for Courtney Morgan, and great for a lot of personnel and GM people around the country. But moving forward to Pete Carroll, it sounds like Pete Carroll is going to make his way back to USC, but not as a football coach. He is going to be a teacher at USC for the next little bit. It sounds like they don't really know what the class is going to be about. Frankly, it could be about anything. I would just go into a room and hear him talk for 2 hours, so not necessarily, I don't know if the students necessarily care what this subject matter is, but it sounds like Pete Carroll is very excited for this opportunity. Sounds like he wanted to go back to what he considers home in a lot of different ways, and I can't imagine Lincoln Riley is too upset about having Pete Carroll in that building. So it's going to be very interesting to watch this unfold. His class does start in spring, but maybe he's around campus just a little bit during this run for USC this upcoming year. So if I walked into a room and I saw Professor, National Champion, Super Bowl champion Pete Carroll, I would be very attentive at the very least. So whatever he does teach, I'm sure those kids will learn plenty from that. Moving forward, I want to talk about this very interesting dynamic between Tualia and Tua during the back end of Tualia's career in college football. He was at Maryland, obviously, for quite some time, was playing pretty good football, was not necessarily overly special, but definitely was playing really solid football, and with that comes a lot of portal rumors. So that portal rumors started to fly around about him possibly leaving, and it sounded like he was pretty close. It sounded like about $1.5 million was on the table for him to come back to the SEC for one season before he went off into the NFL. Obviously, that didn't end up working out, and people were a little bit confused why, and it seems like his brother Tua stepped in. It sounds like Tua stepped in and said, "We're an Alabama family. You are not going to Auburn," because Auburn was the team that was after him so aggressively. So that is a very, very interesting thing, and one of those things that I love it, if I'm being totally honest with you. I never like when people transfer from one rival to the other, even if there is a buffer in between. That's always something that's kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So kind of love this energy from Tua. At the end of the day, though, this probably would have been the better situation for Tualia. He probably would have gotten a little bit better of a look at the NFL, probably would have gotten to play on national television a little bit more. So maybe it would have been better for Tualia's career, but at the end of the day, I love that the hatred still flows through Tua's veins. So very, very interesting story. Kind of a funny one at the end of the day, and definitely one that is very, very interesting more than anything else. But moving on to Miami of Ohio's head coach, Chuck Martin. He had some words for Alabama when he was talking about Graham Nicholson, the very talented kicker, won the Lou Groza Award for Miami of Ohio a year ago. He was asked about, going into this season, you lost your kicker, and he cut the reporter off right about there. And he said, "We didn't lose him. He's at Alabama. We know exactly where he's at. You media people, it's all pretend. No, Alabama stole our kicker. They illegally recruited our kicker and stole him from us. That's a fact. That's college football. We all live in a la-la world where, hey, let's not talk about it. We know what's going on. Alabama stole our kicker." He did not mince words by any means. There's no doubt about that. And DeBoer denied all wrongdoing. He said he went into the portal. They contacted them after. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things that I understand coaches are angry about this. I understand they're going to yell from the rooftops about this. And they likely should. Don't get me wrong. I definitely think it's something that is a big-time problem for the sport. At the end of the day, you got to show us some evidence. At the end of the day, if you really want to be about this, put your money where your mouth is and show us the text that prove that he was contacted before he got into the portal, because then you can actually do something about it. They can't do anything about you just saying that this happened and then DeBoer saying it didn't happen. So it's one of those things that I understand coaches are angry about it, and frankly, I'd love for more coaches to stand up for this, but I'd like them to come with receipts as well. So definitely a very interesting story, and one that, frankly, you probably won't hear about too much outside of this next little bit, frankly. Moving on to Colorado, I want to talk about a very interesting story that came out yesterday. An ex-Colorado staffer apparently went over to Saudi Arabia to try to get some NIL money, which is a very interesting prospect. It sounds like no one in the program was involved in this. It sounds like he acted on his own accord and obviously is no longer an employee at the university. So it could have been that he went over there, he came back, and they said, "What were you doing?" and immediately fired him. So definitely not necessarily talking bad about Colorado in any means here, but this is outright insane. Plain and simple. I understand people need money. I understand there's bills on the table that have to be paid. This would be the death of college football. I know there's a lot of stuff changing, and I've been a little bit dismissive of this whole NIL is the death of college football, or the transfer portal is the death of college football. This would be. Getting people involved in this sport that want a lot back would be a problem. So plain and simple, this cannot happen. If it does happen down the road, it's going to be a landslide, and essentially college football is just going to be run by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. But that's obviously something that is well far away. It was just a very, very interesting story, and one that made me a little bit angry. I won't lie to you. But moving on to the SEC tiebreakers came out for the championship, and most of them were pretty straightforward. But the last one is the one that I want to see, though. The first one, head-to-head. That's easy enough. Everyone understands that one. Record against common conference opponents makes a lot of sense. So, let's say it's Ole Miss and Texas have the exact same record at the end of the day. Let's say Texas beat Georgia, Ole Miss lost to Georgia. That would be the difference maker. Record against the highest placed common conference opponent, kind of the same deal as what I just talked about. It would be that same exact outcome in that respect. Cumulative conference winning percentage of all the conference opponents is a great way to go about it, I think. When you play the tougher schedule and you have the same record as someone else, you should definitely get that nod into the title game. And then capped relative total scoring margin versus all conference opponent makes total sense. Whoever you beat by the most absolutely should be the team that gets in a little bit over the team that maybe didn't score that late touchdown that could have put them over the margin. And then random draw of the tie teams. That's where I want to get. I don't know how you get through the first 5 without having some discrepancy, but at the end of the day, I would love to see this at some point. It would make some people so mad. It would make people go crazy on Twitter, but man, it would be something to watch. I would be totally in for this, and it would definitely be something that, although I would think it is outright crazy and would be ridiculous to watch, I think it would be really funny. It would be all-time theater, and frankly, if this ever did happen, whoever was not picked in that draw immediately in the playoff. There's no question about that. They absolutely are getting into the playoff because I promise you it's not going to be a random draw that kept them out of the playoff. So definitely going to be a really interesting thing to watch unfold. I don't think we'll really ever get to that number 6, but man, I'd like to. I won't lie to you. That definitely would be something that I'd like to see the chaos of that unfold. But obviously, a ton of other stuff happening as we get into week 1 or week 0. Football's almost here. We're about 26 hours away from this thing kicking off. Florida State and Georgia Tech getting it on in Ireland, and I just cannot wait. And I did want to take a quick second here before we finish out today's show just to kind of say thank you to everyone watching. I've done this probably for 4 or 5 months at this point, maybe 5 or 6. Wow, that's kind of crazy. But at the end of the day, everyone that has watched, even a second, everyone that has watched half a minute, everyone that's, seen me talk on this show, it means the world to me. This is the sport that I grew up loving the most. This is the sport that I want to be a part of for the rest of my life in one facet or the other, and being able to do this every single day has been awesome. Being able to interact with some people in the chat has been absolutely incredible, and although there have been some pretty not so nice comments, especially when I talk about Colorado, I've absolutely loved every second. And we're about to get into a season that is going to be off the walls incredible. It's going to be college football in its purest form, and I get to cover it every single day on here. So first of all, thank you so much to everyone that is watching. Thank you to all of the people at GSMC that gave me this opportunity, and we're going to keep it rolling. It's going to be an incredible year. Definitely get your TVs on tomorrow and enjoy this. It's college football. You only get a certain amount of college football Saturdays every year. Enjoy every second of every single one. So again, thank you so much for watching. It means the world to me. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, as I just said, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have incredible people doing really awesome work across every single sport. So maybe you're getting into college football, but you're also into baseball and you're also into NFL. We have it all covered. Don't you worry about that. We're also, if you're into wrestling, go see Eric because he's just incredible and absolutely loves that sport to the ends of the earth. So definitely go utilize all of the people that we have at this place because they do just an incredible, incredible job. So anything in the world of sports at GSMC, we totally have you covered. But thank you once again for listening. Enjoy some football this weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday.
Let's go.